From the Lean Enterprise Institute in Boston, this is the WLEI Podcast, where we share stories of people making the world better through lean thinking and practice. For more information about LEI, including how we can help you apply lean thinking, please visit lean.org.
Hi, and welcome to the WLEI Podcast. This episode is part of the Management Brief, LEI's weekly multimedia newsletter on leadership excellence. My name is Josh Howell, and I'm the president of the Lean Enterprise Institute. For this episode, I had the opportunity to sit down with Charlie Murphy, the Senior Vice President at Turner Construction, responsible for that company's lean transformation. Charlie's been in the role for about the last year and a half, but lean is not new to the company. In fact, they've been undergoing a lean transformation for the past decade or so. In this conversation, Charlie tells the story about what's been going on. Personally, I took away a lot of learning and inspiration from the conversation, and I hope the same will be true for you. Without further ado, let's get started. Well, hi, Charlie. It's good to see you.
Great seeing you, Josh. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, thanks for agreeing to this conversation. We're thrilled to talk with you about lean and management systems at Turner Construction, hoshin kanri at Turner Construction. Thanks again for setting aside some time for this conversation.
Good. It was one of the things in preparation for this, you kind of made me go back and kind of reflect on my journey.
Good.
Which you forget some of the subtle things. You think about the big things, but you think the subtle things. So it was really, this was good for me.
Fantastic.
What subtle things help you going forward with what you're working on today?
Yeah, perfect. The art of reflection, I think a critical aspect of what we call lean thinking and practice. So great. Thanks for doing some preparation then, and hopefully through our conversation today, we can tap into some of those nuanced reflections that you have and pass those along to the audience here. So I think, to get started, not everybody who's listening will know who you are or frankly will know much about Turner Construction. So maybe you could get us started here with a brief introduction to the company, to your career at the company, and maybe even the role that you currently have, given that background.
Okay, I'll start with Turner. Turner's a 100-plus-year-old construction company founded here in New York and still headquartered here in New York. We've grown this past year. We topped $20 billion for the first time ever in our revenue.
No kidding.
We're in 44 cities around the country. We're also overseas, primarily in the Far East, though we have a new initiative this year of expanding into Europe.
Okay.
Turner is a wholly owned subsidiary of Hochtief, a German construction company. That and they in turn have a Spanish parent, another construction company, ACS. So we have a lot of cousins in the construction business around the world.
I guess so.
Yeah. I've been with Turner. Tomorrow will be 46 years with Turner.
Tomorrow, no kidding. Well, happy anniversary.
Yeah, thank you. I started with Turner in 1978 on a research and engineering project in Newtown Square, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. And over the course of the career, worked in Philadelphia, worked in New Jersey. I spent 15 years of my career in estimating, which learned a lot. You learn a lot about how projects come together, the work of the designers, financing projects, owners' input, how important that is, and planning. Estimating is a lot about planning and numbers. And then I came to New York in 1998 and became the general manager of our New York region in 2005 and had that position to the beginning of 2023. Here in New York, we had our business peaked at around $2.5 billion in revenue. We had 1,400 employees. And I'll say for the most part, it was a pretty well-run group. We were professionals and we knew what to do in America's largest city. but there also was a lot of room for improvement. And that's what we're going to talk about a little later today.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thanks for sharing that story. I think you and I met maybe 8 or 9 years ago, perhaps through the co-learning partnership between the Lean Enterprise Institute and Turner Construction. That's afforded me an opportunity to get to know you and to get to know many of your colleagues in New York and actually outside of New York too, across the U.S. throughout the business. And one of the things that has always struck me, and I think struck us at LEI in getting to know you and the folks at Turner Construction, is that many people have careers in the company similar to yours, having kind of come up and spent time working in various aspects of the business, or you could even say of the value stream. So you talk about estimating. There's other groups, of course, sales and procurement. We'll talk about that here in a little bit, and then of course operations execution out in the field. But also similarly, you've got decades of experience with the company, and another thing that we've always really respected is the longevity, I guess, of people in their careers at the company. I think it's clearly a testament to the environment that's created in the company, the opportunities for job advancement, career growth, personal fulfillment, all that kind of stuff. Turner, I think, is a really remarkable company. And I've heard, our mutual colleague and friend, I'll say, Mark Reich, has often remarked that in many ways, that culture within Turner, the company that is Turner, reminds him quite a lot of the culture that he experienced in his 23 years at Toyota, with lots of emphasis on career development and personal growth, and people remaining with the company for many, many years. Anyway, I think just a call out, I guess, that your career and all that and that journey that you just overviewed for us, I think, is pretty common, right? Would you agree with that kind of assessment?
I would agree with that. It's interesting. We have an interesting dichotomy right now, where the leadership is, although most of our leadership hasn't been here for 46 years, they have been here a long time, certainly over 25. So that culture, that working together, being builders, it's at our core. We're builders. Yeah. And but the dichotomy of 40% of our employees were here less than 3 years.
No kidding.
So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy, and just what you maintaining that culture is a challenge. It's a conscious challenge. How do we do this? So I know we're going to talk a little later about hoshin and problem solving and other things, and I think that becomes one of our ways to do this.
Well, maybe, throughout this conversation too, we could touch upon that intermixing of those different generations, which we've been hearing a lot from the leaders that we interact with who are, later in their careers, about some of the challenges that they're confronted with in, leading and working with folks earlier in their careers from a different generation, often have kind of a different perspective on work. And leadership and management and all those things. Anyway, perhaps we can touch upon that too. It sounds like in a pretty extreme version of that. That's what's playing out at Turner these days too. So anyway, something we can touch upon. But as I mentioned, so we met, like I said, 8 or 9 years ago. Let's say 7 or 8, perhaps. And it was at the start of a long co-learning partnership between our two organizations, and the place that activity began following years of practice with lean in various ways across the company. But what you wanted to kind of start out with when that relationship was formed was some focused improvement work in the procurement area. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what is procurement in the construction industry for those that don't know, and what we did with tools like value stream mapping and just to get the ball rolling and get some improvement culture starting to emerge with the focus on that particular process or that particular aspect of the overall value stream.
Sure, Josh. So Turner's a general contractor. And basically that means particularly in New York, for example, we subcontract 90% of our work to trade specialists. So the subcontracting and the procurement of those subcontractors is an extremely important aspect of the work that we do. It's got to be done timely. It's got to be done thoroughly, so we don't have any gaps in the buys. And we also have to select the right contractors who are capable of doing the work with the right, have the financial strength and the workmen and things like that, and management. So we started with procurement. I can still remember the day that we all met in our conference room at 375 Hudson Street.
Me too.
That to start that co-learning. And then we did say we would start procurement. And it's interesting. So every now and again, you get really lucky about the person you select to go do that. And I'm not even sure if I selected this person, but Kevin Chase was the procurement agent who was, I'll say, nominated by his procurement manager to go set up the value stream. And we set up an Obeya room.
Right.
For a project at Columbia University. And just kind of go ahead, Kevin. Right now, that was in 2017. I think we started. Kevin now is our director of environmental health and safety and continuous improvement. And I got to think a lot of that was because he was noticed in 2017 in this exercise that we did.
Yeah. Yes, I remember that day too. I remember you standing in front of your leadership team and declaring your own personal intent to learn through the process of the co-learning partnership with LEI, which I remember just being really struck by having the top leader in the business unit declaring to everyone, we're here to learn, to experiment, to discover how to get better. This isn't about, bringing in some external help who's got all the answers. Certainly we would have been quick to tell you that we don't. But I just thought that set a perfect tone for the co-learning partnership. And the way that got started was to look at a project that had just wrapped up, that had had some challenges, and try to, in reflection, visualize how that process worked, such that, going forward for the Columbia University project that you mentioned, that process could be visualized and then managed in a more visual manner than it had been previously through the mechanism of an Obeya, where that process visualization was set up and where the team began to meet on a regular basis to review the work to get done, review the work that was in flight, review work that had been completed, and along the way, identify problems, rally around those problems, collaborate around those problems. And part of that, part of what was set up to support Kevin in the role of the procurement agent was a fairly, I'll say, simple, kind of basic starter management system. I think that consisted of a weekly routine where leaders like yourself would check in on progress made, what was going on in the procurement process in an attempt to support Kevin, to help him be successful. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about from that early beginning to setting up the Obeya space, then that first semblance of a management system to put in place to function inside that Obeya space. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, no, you bring back memories. We took one of our conference rooms and made an Obeya room out of it, just like you described. And Kevin, which was important, it was his room. Like we didn't tell him what we wanted to see or how we wanted to see things. We let him set the room up as he saw fit, probably with your coaching. And by doing that, he was showing us what were like the important things in the room for us to look at, and he made those visible. I also remember, and I'll just kind of as a note, Kevin had regular scheduled updates for us. And one of the things, as I look back, when he invited me, I always went. And I think because I went, others saw it was important to me, and nobody missed, or very few people missed.
Yeah,
And
I remember.
it's, in LTF thinking, we talk about leader behaviors, and that some of those, and I didn't know about LTF in 2017. I didn't really learn about it until 2023. But those leader behaviors, being present, not being on your phone, being attentive, listening, those things help develop Kevin's capabilities and let him go with that room the way you want to go with the room.
Totally.
We learned together. So it was interesting when reflecting on that.
I love that comment you made about the intent to make the Obeya Kevin's room, as you put it. Increasingly in my own learning, the notion of ownership, building ownership in the folks that are doing the work and that are going to be needed to improve the work and solve the problems in the work. Building that ownership, I think, is an perhaps underemphasized aspect of this thing we call lean. But you're right. I mean, that was, you didn't have some prescription that you were giving to Kevin to just implement in that room. Similarly, I guess as one of the LEI coaches, we didn't have a prescription for Kevin either. But through conversation and coaching and some collaboration, what emerged there was a nice visualization, a useful mechanism both for Kevin and the people that he was working with, but then also, I think, for you as a leader and his line leaders that would have been in between, I guess, his role and your role. Now, I also remember that mechanism, which was bringing you and other leaders close to that process and its status regularly, I believe weekly was the frequency at that time, began to call out the need for both problem solving. Kevin was encountering things that he was encountering some things that he could overcome with some ingenuity and some problem solving on his own, but he was also encountering things that he needed help with. Needed you or someone else to have a conversation, perhaps with a leader of a subcontractor, or any number of people, I guess, that might be needed to break past an obstacle. And so anyway, the need for effective problem solving, and I also believe the need for maybe for some of the leaders a different kind of leadership or management. You've talked a little bit about leader behaviors. One of the core lean leader behaviors that we talk a lot about is coaching, coaching problem solving specifically. So anyway, perhaps you could talk a little bit about that need emerging, the need for problem solving and coaching problem solving, and what that led you to decide and the team to begin learning and working on as a kind of a next phase in this transformation.
Yeah, whereas Kevin was identifying some roadblocks in the procurement process, and one was as simple as, well, I'll step back. One of the things we wanted to do was to cut in half the time it took to bring on a subcontractor, and I think we wanted to go from 4 months to 2 months, because in my mind 4 months is way too long. And one of the layers of that process was setting up a meeting. So once the bids came in, that we would tabulate the bids, do a bid analysis to level a bid off to make sure everyone had the right scope and their numbers represented the work we wanted to buy with the right schedule. And when we did that, we would take it to the client to review with them. And one of the things I still remember to this day was Kevin saying, I get to this point where I'm ready to go and I can't get that meeting set up with the client because there's too many people to pull together. And we would lose like 2 to 3 weeks just pulling one meeting together. And So there was clearly a problem to solve. And we did it in our own fashion, but it wasn't, we say we did workarounds to get it done, but we never really came up with a solution on all the 30 trades that need to be bought, that we would now go from trying to set up a meeting that was taking 2 to 3 weeks to set up to less than a week. So that problem solving skill you're alluding to, the other thing as I look back and, with problem solving goes escalation, the escalation conduit. And we didn't have a defined escalation conduit. Probably like a lot of organizations, if you're if you're in a meeting and you see a problem, and even if you're the senior person, you may go grab that problem, and you probably shouldn't grab it. It's probably somebody who's closer to the work who should be working on that. And you should be coaching them or supporting them, but don't take it over. And I think that was one of the, I can look back that we would sometimes, the leaders in the room would take on the problems that weren't ours. We should never have taken those on. Because quite frankly, we were too busy to solve that problem for them.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point. In fact, that weekly meeting that we've talked about, if I'm not mistaken. So on the one hand, your attendance in that meeting signaled to the organization this is important, and as you said, perhaps encouraged some other leaders to attend consistently. On the other hand, the fact that you were in that meeting as a leader, perhaps, I don't know what, 3 or 4 levels removed from Kevin and the work that he was doing, made it possible for you to take some of those problems rather than, perhaps those problems getting escalated, kind of 1 level up and perhaps 2 levels up or even 3 levels up before it even gets your attention, much less creates the temptation for you to, desiring to be helpful, take that on. So, I think it began to highlight some areas for further design and development of that management system, and as you put it, the conduit for escalation when problems go wrong. This notion of like, we want good problem solving, and we want problem solving to happen by the right person at the right level at the right time, and we can design mechanisms to make that easier or harder to do, to include temptations like the one I've just described, or not, or just like prevent those temptations from arising through the design of that escalation process, for example. So as the problem solving need was emerging, and as you mentioned, it's not like the problems were just getting ignored. I mean, they were getting addressed in some manner, perhaps not by the right person all the time, and perhaps in a traditional, more working around kind of way. But I guess it was at that time that there was a decision made by you to begin learning about A3 problem solving, what I think now a company refers to as fact-based problem solving, kind of collaborative and fact-based problem solving. So anyway, perhaps you could talk about that as a next phase in the learning and the lean transformation, if you will.
Yeah, and sure. Just to give Mark Reich a little credit, I'm sure he mentioned it to me. We here at Turner need to build our problem solving capabilities.
Yeah,
we can deal with things like that. So, with Mark's prompting, we decided we're going to put together a cohort. So the cohort even before we go there, if we wanted to become a lean company, we had to get good at problem solving. And it also had to be a leader-led. So
what made you, could I ask real quick? I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah. What made you believe that it needed to be leader-led?
Again, I'll give some credit to Mark. But if the leaders aren't living in the system and practicing this system, they can undermine it for those. So we really, we had to live in that problem solving world. We had to go direct our people. Hey, let's stop and go, let's do some fact-based problem solving in this issue and let's resolve it. Come back to me on Wednesday with your A3, we call them A3s. Come back to with your A3 and you'll hear later about with our safety. And what did you find out? What's your current state? If you just had the current state analysis, that's great. Because then you can go start working on what's our gap and how do we want to start to go develop the plan to mitigate the gap. But it was important that, it was important that the leaders could do hands-on problem solving, because I didn't know at the time, but we needed them also to be the coaches of our employees for them to be the problem solvers. So we started cohort number 1. So in New York, in our region, we had 6 general managers. Or at the time, 5 general managers. So we had 5 general managers, myself, and then we had our head of lean, Doug Cooper, participated. Because we were kind of focusing on purchasing, we brought the purchasing manager, Frank Yazzo, in. And then we brought another person, David Robinson, from our Miami business unit, just to start to spread this a little at the beginning. So that was cohort number 1, started in the fall of 2017.
And so that cohort,
yeah,
which included you again, so you continue to lead by example. Each of you brought problems into that cohort. So as you're learning A3, you're applying A3, which I'm not sure how you learn A3 without applying A3, but so maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on just how what the process was that played out inside that first cohort.
So each of us picked a problem to work on. I think for the most part, there was very little discussion, or there was very disagreement on where you work on the right problem. But because we picked our own, we all owned our own. Mine was for a project that we were doing for a healthcare facility that had a curtain wall contractor who had a lot of non-conforming work that we had to fix on the site. So that was
and just quickly for those that wouldn't recognize the term curtain wall, this is the exterior of the building that all of us would see when we drive up to any building. We're seeing is effectively the curtain wall. Would that be a accurate definition?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. And the problems more had to do with aesthetics rather than the integrity of the wall or waterproof issues. But we still had problems we had to solve. So that was mine. It was also kind of a throwback. So here we are in 2018 in cohort number 1, and having lived on a laptop computer for for decades, you get to go back with a sheet of paper, an A3 size piece of paper, with a Pentel and an eraser and a ruler, and go back to things that we were doing at the beginning of my career.
Yeah,
so that was fun. Get those pencils back, because we erased a lot.
I remember. I probably still have copies or photographs of the different iterations of that A3, because to your point, as you began to dig into that process, you were making direct observation on the job site, collecting measurements and analyzing that information. More and more kept revealing itself. I mean, even additional questions that needed to be answered revealed themselves that hadn't been identified up front. It was only through getting into the process that it became increasingly clear what you needed to learn and what the meaningful information was and how that might portend for what countermeasures to deploy and stuff like that. So you had your own A3, the other members of that cohort, which is essentially your leadership team. I mean, the people that were running the New York business unit at the time, all went through a similar learning experience. And you referred to this group as the first cohort. So that implies there was a second and a third. And perhaps you could talk about how that process played out. Because as you mentioned, there was the learning around problem solving, but additionally, there was the learning around coaching problem solving. And I think that process helped to provide learning opportunities for both aspects of it. problem solving and coaching.
Yeah. So once we did cohort number one, what we did is we identified our high potential employees. So these are people who we thought could get to officer level of the company. We looked at people with a certain years with the company because you didn't want too junior. So it was probably people between 5 and 10 years with the company at that point, officer level potential. That we identified 60 of those people, and so we had cohort 2, 3, and 4, and we did one cohort at a time. It was interesting. What our limiter was coaches. Cohorts. So we made sure we never made the cohort bigger than we could support with coaches. And of our original 10 in cohort 1, probably 6, we probably got 6 or 7 coaches out of that. Everybody can't be a coach. Everyone isn't suitable to be a coach. So, but that's okay. That's okay. You just you just have to recognize it. So, so that cohort number 1 became the coaches for cohort number 2. And then some of the cohort number 2, along with cohort 1, would coach 2, 3, and 4. So, I'll say, and this will lead into a discussion we're gonna have a little later. So I forget if it was cohort number 2 or number 3. So we gave categories, or we recognized it was important that people pick their own problem to work on, but we wanted to have some limits to what you could pick it on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so we had,
which I think was a reflection point, right, from the first cohort that yes, on the one hand, choosing your problem helps build ownership. We've touched on that already, but if it's completely open-ended, who knows what people will pick and whether that will add up to much for the business unit. So you're starting to kind of bring in the parameters to some degree, not overly so, but to some degree, in essence, providing direction, I guess, for what kinds of problems people are going to focus on.
Exactly right. I remember the 3 categories was, you can work on a safety problem, you could work on a scheduling problem, and the third, I come drawing a blank on the third.
I think it was quality, like punch list.
It could have been quality. But nobody picked safety. And it was like, and I remember getting, and that was kind of, you know, it was kind of us in a nutshell. Nobody picked the safety improvement, which was shocking to me, but that was Turner at the time, or us in New York at the time, 2000, that would have been 2018. It's not that we didn't want safe jobs, or we didn't want to see people, we definitely didn't want to see people get hurt, but it was interesting. Nobody picked safety, and I called them out on it. We'll talk about that a little later.
You did indeed. Well, so there are 2 things that I wanted to touch upon there. One is so that process that you've described, the cohorts, cohort 1, 2, 3, 4, and, you know, sort of someone who graduated from a problem-solving cohort would then take on the role of coaching others through their problem-solving learning. But that process was more or less designed as a learning process. But in effect, what began to happen, in my view, so I'm going to tee this up, and then you can, agree or perhaps add to it, was that effectively the role of manager or leader was also being kind of redefined through that process. So the notion that a leader or a manager ideally can also function as a coach for their direct reports or for others that are engaged in some kind of problem-solving activity. If I'm not mistaken, that aspect of a leader's role or a manager's role wasn't maybe so explicit before this, but it was becoming kind of an expectation that part of the role of a leader here in this business unit is that you will coach folks on problem solving. As you said, not everybody was as effective at it as others. It does take time, but that was becoming an aspect of leadership as I saw it.
No, it's a great observation, and it's It's funny as you reflect back on things, you see it through a little different lens than I did, but the way you just framed it, it's absolutely true that these cohorts, these senior leaders, the general managers, were coaching people a couple levels below them on problem solving. And I would sit in with Tom Stahoviak's group. He would bring the people into the office so they get time. So here these people, level 3, level 4 people, are spending time with the general manager in his office at 7:30 in the morning, each going through each of their problems. Tom was probably 6:30 in the morning. But that one-on-one time with the GM and those high potential people, and you're right, the redefining what's the role of the leader, developing capabilities of our people, going down a couple of levels and doing that was something. It was an unintended consequence, but it was a very important aspect of what was going on.
Yeah.
And
it did.
go
ahead.
I just said, and just the personal connections you make. We all show up at the room at 6:30. You have your cup of coffee, you bring your bagel or whatever you have, and just, you have a little time just to chat about life before we start to work. So just those human connections that we made in those coaching cohorts too is another invaluable part of the development of ourselves, as coaches and staff, and it betters the company.
So you mentioned Tom, another one of the general managers at that time, I guess still today, Charlie Whitney. And in fact, a couple of years ago, I want to say now, Charlie was generous enough to join us for a webinar and told a specific story about him acting as that coach for somebody earlier in their career, kind of lower level in the organization. Randy, I believe is his name. And Charlie just tells a wonderful story about acting as Randy's coach and, guiding Randy through the A3 problem solving process. And it was around a punch list issue.
Scratches on the curtain wall.
Scratches on the curtain wall. That's right. Curtain wall again. That darn curtain wall.
Yes.
Well, the other thing that I wanted to touch upon, so you've mentioned whichever cohort it was, 3 or 4, and with a little bit more direction from you, but still not a ton of direction, certainly not prescriptive in any way. That cohort selected their problems from those general categories. No one selected safety, as you mentioned, and that was a shocking thing to you. Perhaps for the listeners, you could also contextualize this a little bit for us. So I think safety in construction, of course, is extremely important. Safety in New York, historically at that time, there was also some things to factor into, I guess, what was shocking to you or problematic to you in the sense that no one picked a safety problem. Safety had been kind of historically a challenge in the New York business unit for a whole host of reasons. So perhaps you could just describe that kind of context at that time so that people can appreciate the importance of problem solving around safety.
So as you said, nobody wants someone to get hurt on a project. That we have a lot of systems and regulations and things like that, so people don't get hurt, so work is done safely. But having said that, we have a deadline-driven business, and I will reflect back, and I'll just or here in New York, we had a very schedule-driven organization, deadline-driven, and not that we intentionally worked unsafe, but we also were driven by a deadline. And the deadline trumped a lot of things. But if you ask somebody, are you working safely? They'll say, yes, we are. And we're doing everything possible we can to work safely. And I don't think at that time we knew what it meant or how we could work more safely. The industry measures safety with a with a metric called recordable incident rate. So a recordable incident is a defined term from OSHA. So if you cross a certain threshold, so if you get stitches, if you break a bone, if you cross a certain threshold, and that becomes a recordable incident. So so at the time, a good number was a 2.0. So what's a 2.0? You get your recordable incident rates by the number of incidents, or you take a number of incidents per 200,000 man hours creates a ratio. In 2015, our recordable incident rate was around 5. And 5 is not very good. Industry average was closer to a 2. Best of class was below 2. Really top is 1. If you can get to 1, you're really well beyond what most companies are capable of doing.
So 5 was the number in New York. Could you say how that 5 would have compared to the company average or to some of the other business units?
Company average at that time was probably half of that, 2.5, 2 3/4. So we were overall the company was good. New York, we weren't so good. So it became a topic of our hostings. That was one of the reasons why in 2019, when nobody picked safety, like that kind of turned the light on my head that maybe safety isn't as important as it should be with our people here in New York.
Well, that's right. So I think that framed up the next need, and perhaps it was Mark again who, in recognizing that need had emerged, then suggested that you and the team engage in some learning about hoshin kanri as a way to provide even clearer direction than you had been providing, and establish that direction in a way that continues to reinforce this important concept of ownership. I will suggest, and there was this other factor that I think perhaps you could speak to now as well, which was strategic direction that was coming from even leaders above you in the business unit. So the corporate leadership team, CEO was also defining strategy, determining some direction for the organization. And I know from having seen some of that information at the time that safety, building life, I think was the framing, had always been as you've said, an important focal point for the organization. That wasn't new, but I think what you were detecting through this process and no one selecting safety to bring into this problem-solving process, the safety problem-solving process, that there was a opportunity or a need to better connect that highest level strategic direction to this very practical, hands-on problem-solving work that was now happening quite extensively within your business unit. And hoshin kanri became a mechanism to try and make that connection and bring problem solving to bear on this really critical issue, safety, that is. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about that next phase of learning and how that ultimately determined and drove, I think, business unit wide focus on safety, given its critical importance and I guess the relative underperformance inside the business unit.
Yeah. So in 2019, again with Mark's suggestion, he said let's do a hoshin. Let's work on strategic priorities. So we got together. Now, who's we? It's the GM team. 6 of us at the time got together offsite in the first quarter of 2019 and put together our first pass at what the Hoshins were. The company every year issued a strategy card, so that would come out with the new year, and these were the strategies of the company. And developing a lean culture was one of our strategies. Improving safety, building life, right environment. So we had a number of those. So we built our hoshin around those top-down priorities of the company. It was, I still, again, remember being in the room, and we had great discussion on what's being the hoshin, what their activities are being, and kind of where we would go from there. It was interesting in hindsight. That first year, the hoshin never got below the executive team. We developed the hoshin. We had meetings. Each of the general managers had meetings with their teams that we couldn't get from the group that was in that room, myself and the general managers. We couldn't get down below the project executive level, down to the job sites for whatever reason. And we recognized that later in the year, and that kind of set up our next year to do this. So for 2020, we said, let's do this on a calendar year. Let's put our hoshin together in October and work all the details out so we can, beginning of 2020, we can unveil to the company, to the business unit, our 1,400 employees. And that's what we did. We kept similar ones. We kept safety as one, because although we'd gotten a little better from 2008, 15, 16, 17, we've gotten better. We still haven't made that dramatic improvement yet. Another one we consciously picked in 20 was, what can we do to increase the capabilities of our staff? How can we focus on that? We picked another one, winning more work. It's, again, interesting when you look back, that was probably not a good priority to pick. You always need work, but is that a priority, or is that just what you should be doing every day? So it was interesting to reflect on that. So we did our 2020 hoshins, and then COVID came.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right.
COVID came in 2020.
Thanks for reminding me. Thanks for reminding all of us listening.
Right. So all the priorities went out of the way. It was just like we got into COVID mode. Especially, as many of you know, in New York, we got hit really hard. This city got shut down. The state got shut down in the middle of March. We didn't really reopen up till June. Although any critical healthcare, governmental or healthcare projects stayed open throughout COVID. So we always had work going on. We built a temporary surge facility for COVID at Stony Brook Hospital, and we did a lot of things. I'm going to go off on a tangent here.
Please.
Before the COVID hit in March, we did have our annual officers meeting in San Diego. And the topic, or one of the speakers, was a person from Jacobs Engineering talking about safety. And his name was Phil Stasi. And one of the things Phil said that kind of made him a convert from someone who talked about safety to somebody living safety was the act of caring, was the passion of, you're dealing with human life. Just the relentlessness of, it's a person who has a mother and father, may have children, sister, brother. That's a life there. This is important. It's not just a statistic. It's not just a recordable incident. And many of us left San Diego with that passion that Phil kind of gave us, that you just can't talk about it. You have to live it. If you're not living, if you're not actively doing something to improve safety, you're just you're never going to get any better. So there was, which is an important part of the story, there's a catalyst here. Sometimes we need catalysts, like to get us to that next level. And so we left San Diego in February. A couple of months later, COVID hits. But it's the start of a really good story for us in safety here in New York.
So, so there we are. We've had at least 2 iterations with hoshin planning. I appreciate what you said about, your reflection points on that first year, which is to say that you set aside time to reflect on how things worked that first year, not just in terms of the strategic outcomes that you were driving for, but also the process that you used to build alignment and to make plans and determine activities and stuff like that. And so then, had some improvement points to that process in year 2. And I know enough about the story to know that practice of reflecting each year on both the work done to achieve the strategy, but also the process used for, again, building alignment and determining focus, all that kind of stuff. Both of those things were being improved iteratively year over year. There was this catalyzing event too, which reinforced one of those vital few strategic objectives, this one around safety. Of course, there was COVID and all that entailed. Eventually, Turner and New York City and the rest of the world kind of emerged and began to acclimate to altered, but more or less, kind of a version of normal life post-pandemic. You're continuing to iterate on at least an annual basis in terms of both what you're working on to achieve strategy, what your strategy is, what you're working on to achieve strategy, and then the process by which all of that happens. And you mentioned the word. Perhaps I was unaware of this relationship, perhaps, but one of the mechanisms that was set up by you and the team to help with this strategic hoshin objective focused on safety was a call, a standard call that would get set up in the immediate aftermath of a safety incident that originally, and so you can maybe talk about that call and who attended that call. And my understanding was the original name given to that call was the relentless call. Perhaps that was. I was unaware of that inspiring speech that you heard towards the end of 2019. You used the word relentless when you talked about the message that he delivered. So perhaps that was inspired by that term and that talk. But anyway, so could you talk a little bit? And I'll, I guess for the listeners and our topic around management systems, I think in effect, this relentless call, as it was originally called, was a kind of a daily management mechanism that you were putting in place, where operationally safety incidents, as much as we try to prevent them and live safety, as you've put it, do happen. And through a kind of daily management mechanism, we can respond to that somehow. So anyway, perhaps you could talk about that mechanism, the relentless call, and kind of the journey that initiated with regard to safety.
I'm going to tee it up by one of the benefits. Earlier we talked about our problem-solving cohorts, and one of the first benefits we got from the problem-solving cohorts were when we went through COVID, and we had to change the way we operated. Screening programs. There was daily logs and surveys that had to be taken of each employee as they entered the job. Temperature screening, things like that, sanitizing. We were able to use our problem solving acumen to go, what was the current state in different jobs? Where do the delays occurred? What are the we're doing fact-based problem solving on how to make that smoother and make it more standard work around the projects. So COVID kind of reawakened or put it to a more widespread use problem solving. So just as a background. So then when we get into the second half and jobs are back open in June of 2020, we have Phil Stasi's message is still still in my head and some others, where we started an incident because we had a mechanism of escalation. If an incident occurred, we all got an email on our phones. So there was an escalation system already set up in place. And so I started using that alert as what happened. Let's get a group together, have a call with the job team, and let's do some fact-based problem solving. Originally, as you said, we called it the relentless call. They were not good calls. It was really about who did what rather than what happened. It was more about blame. And then, and as soon as it goes to that, as soon as anything goes towards that angle, people get very defensive and they're not open. They don't share. But when you talked about what was the problem, what actually happened, what were the circumstances, give us all the facts, people would focus on that, and you would get some really good learning, problem identification, learning of what the current state was, and then they just took it naturally to how can we get better. But that environment. So we took the right emotion act of caring about the worker who got hurt, but because it wasn't the right environment, our first learning wasn't that good. When we flipped it around and we changed the name from relentless calls to co-learning calls. And even that name just put people more at ease on we're all here to learn. You still hold people accountable. That doesn't go away. If somebody did something that they shouldn't have done, you still got to hold people accountable. But I'll say people were much more receptive to being held accountable than being blamed. Subtle distinction there.
And so with all this kind of evolving over time, how did things, I guess, you teed up earlier that the RIR was 5 in New York. And so the effect of combining this fact-based problem solving capability, which had really been ramped up through the tumult of COVID, with, kind of more clear direction coming through hoshin, a definite focus and enthusiasm around improving safety in the business unit, living life, as you've described it. How did that affect that 5 that you had back in 2015, I think you said, 2017?
So by the time we got to 2019, the 5 had become 3.5.
No kidding.
And then at the end of 2020, it had gone to 2.5, which is a huge increase, a huge improvement. I want to touch on a couple of other things, which to me are also interesting too, is that that we set up on the or a couple of things converge here. One, the fact that we measured our recordable incident rates. We had that made this possible. We had an escalation system, made it possible. We had gone through the problem solving cohorts. So although not every job had a cohort member on it, because Doug Cooper, our lean manager, was very adept at problem solving, he would go coach the problem solvers. And when we did the co-learning calls, myself or the GMs would also be coaching on the calls too. That the and you can't and the leader being there, probably another big difference was, although we had tried over the years different ways, this is all our leaders, on what can we do to improve safety. We were that direct connection with the job team. We'd always talked about it in meetings with our peers or maybe the project execs, but we never really got down to the project superintendent level, the assistant superintendent level. And I think that leader involvement down with the, closest to the work, and them seeing how important it was to us. A lot of times on these co-learning calls, we had that injured person on the call, and them seeing how important it was to the leaders made a big difference in how that worker or that crew lead or that turner person worked hard to go change the way we were working so we could work safer. Let's go resolve this problem. Let's just pass it along. So that you can't underestimate the importance of that leader input. And we didn't come up with the ideas; the job staffs did, the teams did. We were just there to encourage and to give them the support and to share that with other projects. But the fact we can measure, the fact there was an escalation system, the fact we had those problem-solving capabilities, and that it also to me is, why was this one successful?
Right.
This is a management system now. An incident occurs, we have a management system. There's a purpose, there's a process that we follow. People had capabilities. If not, we developed the capabilities. We're going to LTF thinking. It was leader behaviors. There was part of the management system there's follow-up to the intent or countermeasure work. Did we measure it? And there was what was the basic thinking? The worker is the most important person on the project. People should not get hurt on our projects. Accidents are avoidable, basic thinking. And that was just switching people's minds to accidents can happen versus accidents should not happen. We can do work safely. Just that basic thinking. And we didn't know it at the time because we hadn't gotten into LTF yet, but those are all LT, lean transformation thinking.
Well, it's music to my ears,
concepts.
Charlie. Music to our ears, our ears here at LEI, and I think perhaps more than, I don't know, any other leader that we've had the privilege of getting to know and support in some fashion, how you've really explored that LTF kind of pattern of thinking, put it into practical use. I mean, you've really shown the way and provided tremendous learning for us in return, as we, just want to emphasize and encourage more people in their own practice to kind of recognize these key dimensions and continually reflect on these key dimensions. How clear are we in what problem we're trying to solve? What are we doing on the process side? How are we building capability? What management system mechanisms are we setting up for escalation and for coaching? And then how does that leader participate inside those mechanisms? As a coach, are they overly relentless in their leadership, or are they supporting and ensuring good fact-based problem solving? And in some of those fundamentals, that basic thinking that you referred to, we just continue to find in our own experience that where all of those things are being addressed knowingly or unknowingly, determines a lot about how effective a given transformation may be. So, thank you for kind of recapping things in that way and calling out all of those key factors that helped in delivering what really is an incredible safety result. I want to be mindful of both your time, Charlie, for this conversation, perhaps even the audience's time who may be listening. If there's anything else that you'd want to add around the New York business unit before I perhaps transition a bit?
We just have to tell you. We just have to tell you where we are today. Today, as of September 2024, and mind you, I left the role as Senior Vice President for the New York region 18 months ago. But as of today, our recordable incident rate is 0.93.
0.93, no way.
0.93.
Are you serious?
Serious. And we've put in 5.1 million man hours here in New York. So that's 24 recordable incidents. If we were at the old rate, it would have been 127.
Oh my gosh.
So 24 is still 24 too many, but it's remarkable the improvement. And one of the things I'm proud of is that the team has continued to get better.
Yes.
Yeah. And with me not being here. So it's kind of cool when something sustains.
Oh my gosh. That is amazing. I was curious. I mean, I've heard some updates over recent years, and understood that number had continued to go down. I had never heard a number below 1 until right now, live on this recording. So, man, thank you for sharing that. That is amazing, and a testament to your leadership and what you got going. A testament to the team, of course. A testament to the leader who succeeded you in that business unit to keep up the momentum and support the good work that had already begun. And wow, I mean, that is amazing. Well, there were 2 other things I thought we could touch upon, and I'll just tee those up. We can touch upon them briefly. We've talked exclusively about activities in the New York business unit. As you mentioned at the start of this call, Turner is a huge construction company, both domestically with business units, many more business units other than just what's in New York, but you're also a global company with global ownership and everything. So perhaps you could talk. I'm thinking of 2 things in particular, and again, we can spend as little or much time on these as you can afford. But one is, so thinking now, I guess, at the scale of the company, beyond the New York business unit, there's 2 things come to mind for me. One is some of the learning that emerged, even in that problem-solving activity around safety, that then in Doug Cooper's very capable hands was brought and shared, disseminated across the company to help everybody improve in a similar fashion. And then secondly, the role that you've been in for the last 18 months, which is I guess a more of a corporate role, a role outside of the New York business unit, but put in place to help disseminate all the learning and the good things that you had discovered in New York, and share that as broadly as possible with the rest of the company. So I'll just tee up those 2 things perhaps, and again, you can touch upon them sort of as little or as much as you can. But I think for the listener, that'll be interesting too. I think many of our folks are engaged in smaller experiments and are themselves asking the question, and certainly have leaders asking the question about spreading, about scaling, or about disseminating. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience with that, whether it's around Doug Cooper's Safety A3 and or your current role.
So I'll just talk about Doug Cooper's Safety A3 to start with. So Doug was able to take what we had done here in New York and kind of nationalize it. We have a national process called a post-incident co-learning call that's being done by all the teams throughout the country when you have something that gets to the level of a recordable incident. So that's been a positive. Get standard work, right? We all want more standard work. And then it also ends up in a version of an A3, or I think we're calling it a 9-step, is what we're calling, rather than literally it's an A3. And right now, as a company, we're below 1 for our recordable incident rate. So, but even like us, 24 is 24 too many. Is our path to 0? How do we get to 0? So we continue on that. What I've been working on since I left New York is we wanted to standardize the way we wanted to have a standard daily management systems on all of our projects throughout the company. We have 1,500 projects. Each one is run just a little different way, even though we have a lot of common systems and processes and things like that. And it makes it just harder on our staff with going from 23 to 40% of our revenue in high tech. It means a number of our people, one, maybe moving to a different location, or two, that other metric of 40% of our people weren't here 3 years ago. When everyone has to learn just a little different way how a project runs, you're spending time figuring out how to work on this project rather than working on the project. So a standard daily management system where we can tell ahead or behind what the problems are. Are they visible? And if you can't solve them, are they escalating? And then are the systems running the way they're intended to run? That was another key finding. In this role, we did over 100 observations on the project sites in the meetings that we do every day on all of our projects. So we went to the Gemba, because you can't sit at your desk and learn these things. And I'll say another surprising thing that we learned was the role of that middle manager being able to manage, or having the capabilities to manage, the skills to do it. Two, the time. We sometimes gave the managers too much work, so they didn't have time to manage their staff, or have that time in their schedule when things had to get escalated for them to help out on, because they had too much to do. Sometimes they didn't have that time to take that to help their people. So what we saw was where managers were managing and sitting down with their people on a weekly basis, developing their capabilities, checking their work. We did really good jobs. Where that wasn't happening, there were problems occurring. Just because people sit next to each other doesn't mean a manager is managing their staff. There's some interesting things, and I also realized some things that I have been guilty of over the years. When you're short of staff, say, well, let the manager, he'll take some trades. And now I kind of see the consequence of thinking like that. So I continue to learn, which is good, but it's all for the benefit to make our people better, make our projects better for our clients.
Well, it's the little bit that I've been afforded the opportunity to learn about the construction industry and all of its complexity, its fluidity. You just mentioned people transferring between jobs. I mean, these jobs themselves are extremely fluid. What's happening on a given day is unique to that day in many occasions. And then, jobs come and go. The building gets built. The data center gets set up. And then Turner folks and the folks on in the trade partners move on to the next project. There's just so much fluidity, so much constant change in that industry. It's just been really inspiring and remarkable to see how Turner operates, even in its traditional and very successful way, and then how Lean has boosted that to equip and enable the team to be even more effective, given all that complexity, given all that fluidity, given all that constant change, to steadily improve in an area like safety. I mean, that's just remarkable to go from a 5 to under 1. And the impact that it seems like that's happening on the company as a whole, to have the whole company go from its 2.5, I think you said, down to less than 1 as well. Just astonishing amid COVID, amid just all the instability that we've all been experiencing in the world and in business these last few years. So wow, thank you, Charlie. A testament to you and your leadership, a testament to all your colleagues, testament to the company. It's been a real honor and pleasure for us to get to know you and to get to know everybody at Turner. Please send our best wishes to all our friends and colleagues there. And thank you for this conversation. This has been wonderful. I hope the audience gets as much out of it as I have. So thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Josh, and a shout out to LEI. Yourself, Mark, have always been our steadies. We're working with Joe. We're working with Karen. Great teams. It's really they're the ones who also are helping us get to a better place.